All right, hello and welcome. We're happy you could join us today, and I do hope you're having a marvelous day. I'm your host, Charles Collegy. Today's Security Boulevard webinar is brought to you by Snyk and Amazon Web Services. Paul Harland, a Senior Solutions Engineer at Snyk, and Raj Jaripatola, a Senior Partner Solutions Architect for AWS, will be speaking on automating security controls within your continuous deployment pipeline. They're eager to fill you in on the security testing benefits available through Snyk's integration with AWS CodePipeline and how you can directly access with the AWS console. But guys, you're going to have to wait. So because I first have to take care of some webinar items, some housekeeping items to get us going. First, this webinar is being recorded. So later today, all of the attendees will be receiving an email telling you what the link is to find it on demand. However, you can always go to securityboulevard.com and gain access to all of the archived on-demand webinars. So on the events tab on the site, just click on that and it will say webinars and then on-demand webinars. So feel free to take a look and see if there's anything additional you'd like to listen to. So a few comments about our Big Marker platform. First, on the right-hand side, you will see a chat button. This feature allows everyone online to comment on today's event. So feel free to let us know where you're located. Provide some comments and immediate feedback. We'd love to get that information, try to create a dialogue amongst yourselves and with us. Now, save your questions for the Q&A tab, which is next to the chat tab. So you'll use that to submit your questions, and we'll try to answer them before the end of today's session. Now, at the end of the webinar, we will be awarding 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stay with us at the end to see if you are selected. Now, it's time to jump into today's session with Paul Harland and Raj Jaripatola. And if you could please introduce yourselves, Paul and Raj, but however you'd like to do that, take it away, and I will be attending as everyone else will, and good luck.
Shall I introduce myself first?
Oh, sure, Paul. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Just so then you can take over as you're the first speaker. Yes, my name's Paul Harland. I'm a Senior Solutions Engineer at Snyk. That means I'm an SME in terms of our product and the integrations such as AWS, but also work with customers understanding what they want to achieve in terms of Devsecops transformation and in terms of interpreting results. And I'll be taking you through one of the integrations we've got with AWS today. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Paul. Hello, everyone. My name is Shashiraj Jaripatola. I go by Raj. I am a Senior Partner Solutions Architect at AWS. I am based in San Francisco. I work with various ISVs like independent software vendors and AWS partners like Snyk to help them with cloud migration and accelerate cloud adoption on AWS. So my role at AWS is mainly to work on all technical integrations with partners. So today I'm very excited to talk about one of the latest integration that Snyk has done with AWS. So let's get started. So let me start briefly with an overview of what DevOps is. Then we will eventually get into Devsecops, and then we will also talk about how to secure your pipelines and what Snyk has done in this space for you. So let me start with DevOps. So DevOps is a combination of culture,
Oh, we seem to have lost Raj. Okay. Perhaps I should take over then until we have Raj back. Yep.
So, Paul,
Okay.
your presentation, Paul?
Yeah, no problem. I'll go and take the screen, and I will start from our side. Just give me 2 seconds, please, to do that.
Go ahead.
Excellent.
We'll wait for a minute.
Okay, so Raj did say he was having a few problems with his internet, so hopefully he'll be back to join us towards the end. But I'd just like to talk about Snyk really, and what we can help developers and development departments with. Basically, Snyk is an application security platform. But it's coming really from that developer side. So it enables developers to develop fast and stay secure. Rather than traditional tools which are used by security teams and compliance teams, this is a tool that's used across that Devsecops pipeline, allowing developers to remove vulnerabilities as they go about building that application. Really makes the developers an extension of the security team, therefore Devsecops. We've got about 2.2 million developers using the platform. Some of those are on the free tier, some are on the business or enterprise tiers as well. And that means there's a lot of people and a community actually using the platform to secure code on a daily basis. As you can see, we're fairly young as a company, but we're growing very fast. We're understanding where we want to move this platform in terms of going forward. And on the right hand side, you'll see a number of logos of people who actually trust us in their daily build and release of applications throughout their DevOps pipelines. In terms of the Snyk and AWS partnership, we are an advanced technology partner. Apologies. And we do have a number of service-ready components, AWS Lambda and AWS Linux 2. We're also available on the marketplace, so we can make private offers to you, and you can actually use Snyk through your enterprise discount program budget as well. So burning down that committed spend that you do have on AWS. We're also a contributor to the community around AWS. So we write quick starts. We actually write workshops which help people bootstrap and understand how they can get that security scanning into their developer processes as soon as possible. But let me just take you through a little bit about the area or the space that Snyk's involved in. If we look back 10 years, developers were writing their application code, and very minimally, they were also using open source libraries. Therefore, it wasn't a big percentage of the code. And once they'd actually made that application, that'd be then kind of thrown over the wall to IT, who would work out how to actually send it live, how many servers were needed, for instance, what the network settings would be on that, and actually how to support it through its life cycle as well. What we've seen in the cloud native era is actually developers getting more and more of that role added to their workload. So actually developers now have containers that they have to look after. They have infrastructure as code files that they need to look after as well. And that really means the developer's role has expanded. Also, the use of open source within applications has greatly expanded as well. And for that, they're going to need a tool that will help them understand and inspect each of those layers of the application and show them any vulnerabilities, but crucially, how to remediate them as well. And that's really what Snyk are doing. If we look at this typical application stack here, so we've got code written by a developer, we've got the open source code that they use, the containers and the infrastructure as code. Quite often, according to GitOps practices, these are all within the same Git repository. And Snyk has a tool within the platform that can look at each of those different layers. So right at the top, the developer written code, we've got a SAST tool, so static analysis. We have an SCA tool that looks at the open source code and can tell you where vulnerabilities at which versions of open source are bringing those in. We've then got a container scanning tool, which can look at your Docker files, can look at your registries in order to inspect those containers, whether it's the base image or the user instructions, tell you about vulnerabilities, and again, how to remediate them. And then underneath all of that, the infrastructure as code, which tells the infrastructure how to behave, the containers where to be spun up, how to replicate. That can be misconfigured as well. So we're also looking at that code, showing you how you can remediate any problems. Now, Snyk's unique approach really is all around developer enablement. In the DevSecops world, this is how you scale security, not by building a bigger dedicated security team, but enabling the developers. It's called extreme ownership. Now, given the right tools, given the right information, and given the ownership, the developers will make the right choice. So really expanding that security over to the developers allows them to remove a vast chunk of any security weaknesses or vulnerabilities before we get to that development team. Now, a great way of actually scaling that as well is to automate some of those fixes. So Snyk actually enables the automatic generation of pull requests, advice on how to fix things to really reduce the amount of work that developers must do in terms of parsing the information that comes from the platform. And you'll find all of Snyk's reports are prioritized, meaning that developers can very easily see what they should fix next in order to improve that risk profile. But underneath all of this is a security database, and a tool that gives false positives, that gives the wrong information, is not a tool that the developers will continue to use. So we take extensive care of our security database to maintain that it's got no false positives, that we've got all the information in that security database that the developers need to remediate the problems. And in that sense, we've got a lot of different ways that we actually build up that database. For instance, we do look at the MVD and the CVE in order to pull some of these open source vulnerabilities in. But we also actually add extra information where we can as well, such as exploit maturity. But we've also got a dedicated security team who are out there using tools and manual processes to find new vulnerabilities, vet these vulnerabilities before they get added into the security database. On top of that, we've also got relationships with academic institutions and white hat hackers who are finding vulnerabilities, and we help them publish the vulnerabilities, and we also offer bug bounties as well. So this means that the security database around Snyk is second to none, and you can see by some of the partners that OEM our database, such as Docker on their Docker desktop products and on the website, Rapid7, Tenable, Trend Micro, that this is a industry trusted database. Okay, in terms of AWS, we've got a number of integrations which will help you spin up and really bootstrap your DevSecops processes. One of the easiest ones to do is actually AWS CodeCommit. So you can scan your repositories, you can look for vulnerabilities in all those 4 different layers that you saw on the iceberg slide, and you can actually push fixes out there as well. We've got an integration into code build. Now, what that's doing, it's the continuous integration arm of AWS, and we can scan there as well. The one I'm going to show you today is CodePipeline, and that's really the continuous deployment part of AWS. I'm going to show you the integration, how you can add that into your pipeline and actually fail some of those builds, so preventing vulnerabilities from going live. Okay, let me slip into the demo now. So here you can see I'm on AWS in the code pipeline. I've got one pipeline built. Here we're pulling source from GitHub. We're scanning with Snyk, and then we're deploying that out. But actually what happens is we actually failed this part because of vulnerabilities. Therefore, we can stop the deployment actually happening. But for this case, let me show you how easy it is to integrate into your pipelines. So I'm going to edit this pipeline, actually edit and delete this stage. I'm then going to add a new stage, and I'll call it Snyk scan. Once I do this, I then add the action. Again, I'll call it Snyk scan. Action provider, we are built natively into the invoke, so you can just pick Snyk. You can then choose what artifact we want to test. There may be a number here, but we've just got the one from pulling from GitHub here, which is actually the one we want anyway. We then go and connect to Snyk, and this is where we choose what type of scan we actually want to do. We can choose whether or not we want to fail the build or continue the build. Some people want to continue the build, but just generate a report. Some people would like to fail the build based off the certain parameters that are there as well. So here I can choose one of the organizations that I want this to be scanned against. Because in Snyk, each organization could have its own security or license policy. Here I'm just going to choose a default one. We'll call it the web app. And here I want to block the deployment if we find any errors. But what type of errors do we want to block the deployment for? Here we can choose any error at all, or ones that are upgradable. These are very easy to fix. So we might actually choose just to block deployments for easy to fix errors. And we can also choose severity as well. So if I pick low, anything low and above will cause the build to fail. Here I'll pick medium. So anything medium or above will then fail that build. Once that's then done, we'll finish our OAuth journey by clicking confirm. We'll then go back. We will choose our build artifact. I will call it build artifact very originally. And then that's now done. Now that's in there, I can save and I can promote to live. So that's it. Next time that runs, and in fact, it'll run now, I will start doing that Snyk scan. But you saw I'd done some previously before. So if I click on history, we can go and have a look at one of those failed builds and see some more information. Let's have a look at Snyk report, show you the intelligence that we give you around these applications. So here you can see we've failed this stage. And if we click on this, we'll actually go to that Snyk report, which will give that prioritized vulnerability list of everything that we found with the application. Here we're just looking at the open source, and we've found actually 2 manifest files. This is an app that's got an npm or Node.js on the back end and a yarn managed app on the front end. So we're actually doing both of those scans here. And you can see we've got the high severity ones at the top. And then we go further down and we can see we'll end up going to medium and low. Now, if I wanted to find out more information about this particular vulnerability, I would then go and click more about this vulnerability and actually go to the Snyk database to have a look at that full page. And here we've got the CVE number. That's the actual vulnerability that exists. We've got the CWE. That's the common weakness enumeration. That's the type of vulnerability that we're dealing with here. And a 400 is actually prototype pollution. Now, while we're here, let's go and have a look at what a full Snyk report looks like. If I go over to my application here and to my projects, and then remember the iceberg that I showed you before, where we're looking at all 4 different layers of the application. Now, if I go into this one scan of that same goof project you saw, but here we're doing all of those 4 different scans. So if I open up my goof there, you can see we've got intelligence about each of those different layers in the application. We've got a code analysis. That is the static analysis or SAST scan. We've got package.json, again, relating to that front end and back end in this mono repo here. And what we've actually got is the open source report that shows the vulnerabilities. Again, we've got the Docker file that relates to the container and the deployment.yaml. That's the Kubernetes vulnerability scan that we've done for that as well. So let's first have a look at one of these full reports. Here you can see we're in the report page now. Again, we've got further prioritization here, though. Look on the right-hand side, we've got the Snyk score. What we're saying is the developer coming to this report should have their next best action automatically showed to them. So the item at the top is the most vulnerable, easiest to fix item in there. And the developer can see that by looking at the Snyk score. I can go through and look for further information if I want. And on the right-hand side, I can click to go and fix this vulnerability as well. But what's really important and what separates Snyk from other tools really is looking at that dependency tree and finding the vulnerabilities that are not in the top layer. Here you'll see body parser itself has no vulnerabilities, but it brings in a transitive dependency called QS that does have vulnerabilities. And if we're talking about fixing QS, we have to think about in terms of fixing the top level package, and Snyk can do that. So if I go back to the issues and search for QS, you'll see actually, yeah, we've found a problem with QS, but you need to update Express and upgrade body parser to different versions in order to remove them vulnerabilities. And in a similar way, Snyk can open the pull request as well, and we can go and do that. Now, if I just go over back to this again, let's open a pull request and I'll show you what happens here. What we're going to go to first is an interim screen. Now, I've just selected that one item to fix, which is the ADM zip, but I can actually add extra items into that pull request if I want. I'm not going to do that now. Let's keep it quite simple for this demonstration. And I can go and open that fixed pull request as well. And now we'll actually go over to GitHub, because this is where this repository is actually stored. We do actually integrate with lots of different SCM tools, and on this integrations page, I can actually show you that as well. So here you go. Now, if we go over to this pull request, you can see we've wrote a nice commit message. A developer coming to this page now who's watching their repo will see why this pull request has been created. But what we're also doing is a license and security delta check. We're saying, does this pull request add any new vulnerabilities? We want to make sure that we're not adding new vulnerabilities to the package while we're also removing old vulnerabilities. So you can see over time, you're actually going to get a reduction in the number of vulnerabilities in that whole project. And really, that's what we're saying with Snyk. The first stage is visibility. Let's understand exactly what we've got in there. And then we can start removing vulnerabilities while we're preventing new ones going in. And that means, we're getting the whole team to be part of that security process. Okay, so imagine the developer now. They've removed all of their vulnerabilities in their open source projects. The next thing they'd want to do is actually the code that I've written. Does that bring any vulnerabilities in? And this is where we're looking at the Snyk code or static analysis scan. Here you see, again, organized by the severity, the vulnerabilities that we've found within that developer written code. And here you'll see we've got an SQL injection, command injection, cross-site scripting. Again, they're all organized and linked to the common weakness enumeration that they relate to. If I go to the full details, what we get, again, you'll hear this all the time for Snyk. It's not about showing you the vulnerability, but can we show you how to fix it? You'll get a full taint flow analysis that lets you route through the application that you've written, showing you how that problem is actually enacted in your code. And you can see over here as well, we can also scroll through to have a look at the rest of that page as well. Now, for certain items, what we've also got is a fix analysis. And what that means is we've got an educational piece. We've got some details about this type of vulnerability. We've got the types of attacks that happen because of this vulnerability and how to prevent it. But even better than that, we've found some good open source projects that have had and have subsequently fixed this same type of vulnerability. And I can link through these, find one that looks interesting, and then go and view that project and that very commit over on GitHub. Therefore, giving me all the ammunition and education I need in order to fix that vulnerability. Okay, if we think back to that iceberg now, we've looked at two of those layers. We've looked at the open source code and we've looked at the developer written code. Now, those together, they make the application. And in order to send that live, we put that on a container. And we want to make sure that the container also has no vulnerabilities. So let's now go back to that scan and have a look at what we do when we're looking at Docker files. And here you can see what we're actually doing is, first of all, looking at what base image we're using. So you can see actually my current base image is node 6 stretch, and that's bringing in 916 vulnerabilities. What we do actually is we look for similar types of base image, and we're telling the developer, and this table only looks small, but if a developer was to try and redo the work within this table in order to understand what base image they should be using, it could be a day's work. And by the next day, it could be out of date as well. So here we give this table updated every day with the latest and best base images you can choose. So what I'd do as a developer, I'd look at the alternative images, I'd pick the one perhaps with the lowest number of vulnerabilities, understand whether or not that would support the application that's being deployed upon it. And I could open, again, a fixed pull request. Therefore, we're now choosing the best base image for our application to go live. And if I scroll further down, you can see we've still got that full list of vulnerabilities that we've found. So again, you can get the dependencies tree and understand how to fix these containers as well. But in interest of brevity, what we want to do next is perhaps have a look at that Kubernetes cluster or infrastructure as code. Now, if I go over to a different project where I've actually got a live running Kubernetes cluster and I've deployed the Snyk agent on that. And that Snyk agent, what it does, it introspects what's going on there, finds the containers and understands the setup. So here you see live Kubernetes cluster. If I click on this item here, we'll go and look at that report. And that report will first run a series of tests on that application to say, actually, how is this set up? And you can see it's failed 5 of the 6 tests in this particular instance. But what we're also doing is saying what containers are running on this Kubernetes cluster and what vulnerabilities do the containers have as well. This is basically another view of your containers. Now, you may say we've already scanned the containers. Why do we need this? Well, the reason is because often if people are not releasing 3 or 4 times a day, they may have something live that stays there for a week while their development branch diverges. So we want to make sure we're scanning the development branch before release, but also scanning the live cluster while it is live. And this is why we do it in both these places as well. So what we need to do, first of all, is we need to address these problems. So we go back to that Git repository where the deployment YAML is scanned. So if I go back to projects here, what you'll see is I've got the Git repository here where my deployment YAML for that particular cluster is held. If I click on this item, what we're going to get is a report generated about that file. And what you actually see on the right-hand side is the file. On the left-hand side are the items against a specific policy that don't fit. So first, we've got a couple of items here which are useful. Container is running without CPU limit, and we've got container is running without memory limit. Now, if I wanted to address these, I would open this one up. Again, piece of education. Let's tell the developers what the problem is. What's the impact of this problem as well, and how can I resolve it? So here you can see that by adding resources limits CPU over on my deployment.yaml, I'll be able to redeploy that cluster and it'll now pass that policy item. Now, again, in the interest of not giving developers false positives, we allow you to configure this exact policy as well. So that means you can have different clusters, whether internal or external, with different policies applied to them to ensure that they meet that policy, but the developers don't get false positives as well. And that really is what we're doing today, looking at all of those different layers of the application and helping you scan them through all of those different stages of the DevOps pipeline. Now, what you need to understand perhaps about open source code, you probably already do, but this is a one-way conversation, so I have to presume a few things, is that the number of vulnerabilities will continue to grow. This is not necessarily a problem. This is an artifact of how open source code is created. It's created by distributed teams, solving small problems at once, incrementing, understanding that they may introduce vulnerabilities, but according to Linus's law, any vulnerability or weakness is shallow as long as there are enough eyes looking at it. And that's why big communities form around these open source projects, and they help each other and fix each other's code as well. But you know, there's a phrase in the game which says open source ages like milk, not wine. So what you want to make sure is that you're not using old pieces of open source code, that you know what versions you're using, that you're updating them regularly when you find vulnerabilities or when you find the milk turning sour. And as people move to not just using open source code, but also infrastructure as code, they'll find that misconfigurations happen more and more. This may be because developers are not used to it yet, or it's not a developer's full-time job. They may inherit some infrastructure as code and just have to make a few changes once every few months. This means that they actually need a tool which can help them make the right decisions at them far and few between times that they do actually make changes to that code as well. Or it may be that you know, the security team just wants to make sure everybody's got code that is of the same quality as well. And if you look here, you can see actually what we've got is people who are doing the testing across that software development life cycle realize that they can actually reduce a lot of the vulnerabilities before they get to the production. So it's not a case of, in the old days, perhaps you'd build an application, do a pen test, put a WAF on the front end, and perhaps do an IS test as well. What you want to make sure is a lot of those vulnerabilities are removed before you get to live anyway. And that means once you do the pen test and once you add a WAF on the front end, it's only looking for things that you haven't removed, less false positives, less of the easy items, and it makes those tools more useful further down the line. Anyway. Okay, so what we want to say now is, most code is open source. We know that now. We look at applications and 80% of it is coming from open source. So we want to make sure that we understand fully what's in there. We want to understand what our processes are for scanning and changing that open source code as well. And we want to make sure we can stay on top of it at scale. It can no longer be left to best endeavors to make sure that you've got an audit of what code is in your application and when it needs to be updated. We need a tool that can allow us to do this at scale. Now, back to, I guess, the business side of things. Just to remind you that the Snyk platform is now available. You can go and use this within your AWS infrastructure. You can use your allocated budget to pay, but there's also a free version as well. If you go and look in the chat, you see you can sign up for a free version of Snyk. That will be free forever with no credit card. Obviously, there are scan limits, but it's a very useful tool, and I implore you, please go and try that. Also, what we do is we work with the AWS community as well. So as well as being on the marketplace, allowing you to purchase, we're also saying, what can we do to help people bootstrap their use of application scanning within AWS? So we've created some workshops and quick starts, which will allow you to choose what you want to do and help you through that entire process. And this, we're not going to stop there. We're building out more of these items as well. So we're going to continue doing that. Okay, thank you very much for listening today. I think Raj has not made it back. Oh, he has. Excellent. How are you doing, Raj?
Yep.
I'm so
Sorry
glad
about
that your internet's come back.
I apologize. So let me go through the slides that I wanted to show, because I think Paul covered some of them, but there were some things that are more AWS specifics, and I definitely want to go through them once again. So we have time. So let me start again. Let me start with a brief overview of DevOps. So it's a combination of culture, which includes break down cultural barriers, work as one team, support business and IT agility, collaborate and communicate. Then we have process, which includes treat infrastructure as code, automate, test, measure, and monitor. So a combination of culture and process makes up tools for DevOps. So why do organizations adopt DevOps? So organizations adopt DevOps because of faster time to value. Let me go back here. Faster time to value that comprises of quality, speed, and agility. Let me talk a bit about CI/CD. So we hear a term CI/CD a lot, especially in the DevOps area. So let's see what is the difference and how are they different. So let me start with the continuous integration. It's like techniques and tools to implement the continuous process of applying quality control. In general, small pieces of effort applied frequently to improve the quality of software and to reduce the time taken to deliver it. Whereas, if you look at continuous deployment, it's a technique and tools to improve the process of software delivery, resulting in the ability to rapidly, reliably, and repeatedly push out enhancements and bug fixes to customers at low risk and with minimal manual overhead. Let's define what's a pipeline. So these are some of the things that make up a pipeline. It could be build automation, continuous integration, deployment automation, test automation, and finally service orchestration. So these are some of the things that make up a pipeline. So now let's come to the topic that Paul talked about, and I will also go through some of the drivers here in Devsecops. So let's define what Devsecops is. It is a combination of cultural, philosophies, practices, and tools that exploits the advances made in IT automation to achieve a state of production immutability, frequent delivery of business value, and automated enforcement of security policy. DevSecOps is achieved by integrating and automating the enforcement of preventive, detective, and responsive security controls into the pipeline. So DevSecOps comprises of development, security, and operations. So what are the tenets of DevSecOps? Test security as early as possible to accelerate feedback. Prioritize preventive security controls to stop bad things from happening. When deploying a detective security control, ensure it has a complementary responsive security control to do something about it. Finally, automate as much as possible. There are three major components of DevSecOps: security of the pipeline, security in the pipeline, and finally, enforcement of the pipeline. Now, let's talk about how do you do the infrastructure security risks to pipeline? What are some of the risks and how you can prevent it? Find out who has access to underlying infrastructure resources. How are pipelines patched and updated? How is least privilege between pipelines enforced? Are my pipelines deploying into approved AWS accounts? Does the pipeline align with organizational responsibility? Let's see how we can use some of the infrastructure controls that we have in AWS. Let's talk about AWS Systems Manager. This can be used for patching automation, inventory collection, session management. Then you can use AWS Inspector that can scan current infra for vulnerabilities, scan for internet reachability, and here you can also use Snyk. AWS Identity and Access Management. You can define policies between pipelines, policies between functions. Amazon VPC for network access to resources. AWS Secrets Manager, Infrastructure Credentials Manager. And finally, AWS CloudFormation, deploying updates to the pipeline. This is how you can achieve infrastructure controls for your pipeline. Treat pipeline as a workload. Securing the application starts with securing the pipeline. The CI/CD pipeline is itself a workload. Its purpose is to integrate and deliver other workloads. It has users supporting infrastructure, application, and data components, etc. These components are typically managed as code. That is why we used infrastructure as code. Now, security in the pipeline. What is available today? Code analysis. We have like static analysis, infrastructure as code, security as code, dynamic analysis, unit tests, integration tests, system tests. Then vulnerability scan. This is definitely where Snyk comes into very well and help you out. You can also use AWS Inspector here, but today we are concentrating on Snyk also. Do hash verification for your deployments. Finally, make your monitoring automated as much as possible. Now, how do we do data controls protection? Like how do you protect your data? You can use Amazon Messy. Is the pipeline data in S3 free of PII, personally identifiable information, credentials, etc. Key management service, protect data server and client side. Protect who has access to decrypt. Secrets manager. You can use it for control access to credentials, enable central credential storage, credential rotation. Finally, AWS identity and access management, policies for data services, policies for source repo. And what are the benefits of DevSecOps? We talked a lot, Paul mentioned a lot of things. Those are always coming in handy. But here are some of the highlights that I would like to definitely stress on. Confidence that workloads and changes are validated against corporate security policies. Consistency and repeatability of security validation. Manage the business place of innovation, security at scale. So thank you very much. I think we have today talked about some of the principles of DevOps, Devsecops, code pipeline, and how Snyk can help you. So now we will have some time for Q&A. So let's get into the Q&A.
All right, that's great, guys. And I see we're all here now. And I want to remind all the audience that ask your questions in the chat. We have a few in the chat in the Q&A section of the chat. I guess we could call it that. And we do have a few questions already up in here. So Tom wants to know, when during the DevOps pipeline is it best to scan applications for vulnerabilities? I think, Paul, that might be for you, or Raj could take that. But
I've worked with many different customers, and the answers are different, dependent on their needs. What's often good, though, is to get that visibility first. And one of the easiest integrations to do that is the SCM repository. It's always good to understand perhaps, how much of a problem you have or how good you actually are before you start. Get that baseline. For instance, if you look at this camera now, you can see me in a fairly clean room. But if we perhaps open the angles higher and lower, you'll see some Amazon boxes, some unused exercise equipment. Getting that real visibility is one of the best places. And then you could decide from that, actually, what's going to be our next priority. Is it preventing vulnerabilities going live, or is it enabling the developers to start removing the vulnerabilities first? And at Snyk, what we often do, in fact, what we always do, is work with the customer in order to understand the rollout plan. As Raj says, it's not just about tools, it's about culture as well. So part of the Snyk deployment is understanding what the current culture is and understanding actually how can we work with that business in order to transform that DevSecops pipeline.
Raj, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I just want to add, right, like how do you want to scan, right, and where do you want to scan, right? Where is your code? Is it in a code commit, or is it in GitHub? Do you want to like do static analysis, or you want to do dynamic analysis, right? So if you want to do static analysis directly, you can integrate directly with code commit or GitLab and find out what's happening with your code. Are there any vulnerabilities? Dynamic analysis, right? That's where Snyk and some AWS tools like AWS Inspector come into picture. They can help you find out what's happening dynamically, because you can like download a lot of configurations file on the fly. So those might not be part of your repository. So in those cases, right, you decide like, do you want to do it static analysis or like dynamic analysis?
All right, sounds good. So next question from Harry is, does Snyk also scan unmanaged dependencies?
Yes, it's quite. You don't hear this often these days. If we look at languages like C++, often they don't have a package manager. Whereas languages like Python, Node.js, Java as well, most Java instances these days have a package manager, and they're called managed packages. And we look at the manifest file in order to determine what's in the package and scan those. But absolutely, we also scan unmanaged files as well. They could be jars that you place within your application. They could be open source components in C++ that you have within a certain directory. And you actually may have heard or may not, Snyk have actually purchased a company called FOSS-ID, which is an expert in terms of unmanaged dependencies. They have a huge database that can recognize all these different dependencies and actually build an audit trail and allow us to understand what version of unmanaged components you have within your application as well. Short answer, yes.
And since the question was directly to Snyk, but does Amazon have anything to add about controlling or managing unmanaged dependencies?
This is a very interesting question. So AWS has like managed services, and then unmanaged services are some like you download from open source, or you get into your repository because it came from your legacy applications. Regarding managed services, right? Like sometimes people say, right, okay, I want to find out what's happening with my RDS, right? I want to maybe go and scan. AWS doesn't allow you to do that, but it will let you look into the Artifactory and tell you what sort of scans are done and what sort of compliance reports are available for you, so that you can go with confidence that, okay, I don't need to worry about AWS RDS because AWS has already done enough compliance and I'm happy with these reports. Now we talk about unmanaged dependencies, right? As I said, you can go to open source and download anything and then you make it work. But now, can you configure AWS Inspector? Yes, why not? So it all depends. Like you also have like AWS Systems Manager. So you just download the agent, then go into the dependencies to see what's happening. So definitely those services are available in AWS too.
Okay. All right. And again, feel free to, we got some time left for today. So if you have some questions for Raj and Paul, just put them in the Q&A section. We do have one more from Martha right now. And this one's kind of interesting. I don't know if we really talked much about it today, but can my security team set their own security policy using Snyk? So, Paul, I guess it really comes down to: do they have to use what you set, or
Yeah.
are they free to use what's important to them?
Yeah, so yes, within Snyk, we have a default security policy. That's what our security experts deem, as well as things like the CVSS score should be the priority of that item. But there may be certain things you want to change differently from our default policy. So yes, we do allow you to create security policies and in fact license policies within Snyk. For security policies, for instance, you can change the security rating for a certain CWE, that's the common weakness enumeration, or a CVE, that's an actual instance of a vulnerability. But we can also use Snyk ID as well, and we can actually change the severity based on what the customer wants to do as well. So everything is by default what we expect it to be, but you can also override it as well. Yep.
Okay. Here's a interesting question from Rodell, and that is, with the rise of cybersecurity attacks, do you still recommend the use of open source? And you talked about how much is open source, Paul, and I think the issue is we can't really get away from it. But
Yep.
How do you deal with the open source since so much of it is attacked?
Yeah, it's the biggest attack vector. It now makes up the largest part of your applications. The way to deal with it is it's ultimately a really useful tool. You just have to manage it properly. And we do have a slide. I've not got it in this slide deck, which shows actually from the time of finding a vulnerability, you've actually got a certain amount of time before people start attacking it. And if you've got a tool which can, at scale and without missing vulnerabilities, help you manage and update, or at least understand and then create a front-end WAF rule around the vulnerabilities, then open source is certainly a useful tool that you should actually use within your applications. It's up to your own risk profile, of course, but as long as it's managed well, it's a useful tool which can help you actually, your business, get ahead. And after all, that's what you want to do. You want to create the best applications that you can.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in. I'm the host, but this is one of my subject areas. So I just thought to mention that, in terms of open source, it's been out there, it's been reviewed. If you have to rewrite that, there is a chance that you're going to make a coding error again. So just saying that the open source is potentially has a coding error, you can recreate those same coding errors in your own work, and you're going to be spending a lot more time and things that way. And like you said, there is a time lag between a vulnerability announcement and a attack vector coming in. You have time to correct that.
Yeah.
Raj, do you have any comments about the open source potential for vulnerabilities?
Definitely not specific to AWS. I just want to share one of my previous company. I used to work for a startup where they used to have everything open source because startup doesn't have like the budgets that the big companies have. They want to try everything open source. For example, they said, okay, let's work with NoSQL, Cassandra. It's all good. Then they realized once you have the open source, there is not everything available there. You again have to go through the enterprise license to get all the help you want. Otherwise, you're on your own. So this is the kind of judgment you have to make when you go for open source projects. Then if you talk about AWS, right? AWS has like different controls, like right, you can like prevent a lot of infrastructure. You can use VPCs. You can make private subnets. So these are some of the options AWS gives you. Even though you can get open source projects, but you can like use some of the AWS features to help you out with some of these kind of attacks.
Sounds great.
Could,
Now,
could
I'm
I,
not.
sorry.
No,
Sorry
go
there,
ahead.
Chad.
Go ahead.
I was just
Paul.
going to share one more thing. I was just trying to find the right screen. Can I just share my screen for 1 second?
Sure.
Sure.
Go ahead.
In Snyk, we also have the Snyk Advisor. Now, part of using open source is, am I using the right package to solve my problem? And things, if you look down here, we're looking at things like popularity. How many people have downloaded it? How many people are using it? How often is it maintained? How many different developers are actually involved in the maintenance, and the security and community around these things as well? So it's not just around choosing any open source. Let's choose the best package to solve a particular problem, and let's maintain that package by making sure we update it when we find vulnerabilities as well. Thank you. Sorry, I just needed to add that bit.
No, that's great. And I think
Yeah,
you
no
kind of
worries.
built on in your
It's all good.
presentation. You also mentioned bug bounties and
Yeah.
issues associated with having the white hat hackers out there
Yeah.
helping to build the robustness in the code, and
Yeah.
and you work with them to make
Absolutely.
improvements and things of that sort too. Yeah.
I mean, open source is a fascinating subject. I don't know if you've read the article, "The Cathedral and the Bazaar." It's about the emergence of open source and indeed shared computing. Fabulous book. It'll make you realize that actually open source being vulnerable is an artifact of how it's built. It's not an error, but things get fixed fast as well. So it's good to be able to use open source, but have that tool that will help you maintain it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's one last comment in the chat. It wasn't really quite in the question area, but Devara, 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 and it mentioned
Devraj.
about talking about ransomware attacks. Now, I don't know if ransomware is an issue for AWS's cloud environment and Snyk, but do you have any comments, since ransomware is top of mind in people's positions right now?
Yep. So it's an interesting question. As I said, right, AWS, like it's a public cloud, but it depends. Even though it's a public cloud, right, how much really you want to make it public, right? How much you want to secure your applications? What are the options AWS provides? Like there could be like a DDoS attacks, right? Like so, there AWS has like AWS Shield, then AWS has like other services. Then how much you are exposing your subnets to, your VPCs to. So it's all depending on your administration on how much you really want to expose. Maybe put everything in like a private subnet. Don't let any internet come into your private subnet, and just have like a NAT gateway to just make a call to the public subnet, where you'll just have a customer facing website, but everything else is like in a private data center, or sorry, private subnet, and where you can prevent most of this kind of attacks. Apart from that, AWS provides, like as I said, AWS Shield, right? They are watching for all these attacks that are coming in. So there's a paid subscription, and then there's something free that AWS does. If there's an attack, right, they will shut down your servers, and they will also, if there is any charge because of this kind of attacks, right, AWS is going to compensate you for that, because it's not only attack on you, it's an attack on AWS. So we do have that kind of services we should definitely look into when you want to have like DDoS attacks, like ransomware attacks. So definitely AWS comes very handy with this kind of infrastructure.
All right. So we're pretty much at the end of our time for today. So I want to thank Paul and Raj. You guys made it through our little technology issues. Well done. I definitely gained some additional knowledge. So, and it looks like Snyk and AWS really work together to help you secure your code throughout the Devsecops process. So, and I do want to bring to the audience's attention again, Paul's mentioned, before we close out, that there in the chat window there is a link for you to sign up for a new free Snyk account. So again, I give you the opportunity to take a look at that and kick the tires and see how it's going. And I thought Paul was great, where he mentioned, that no credit card and it's going to be free. It's not a demo. So
No, that's right. Yeah.
So we'll go there. I want to name our 4 winners of the $25 Amazon gift cards, and they are Keen H, Julie H, Alan J, and Daryl J. But no, Paul didn't make it.
It was only for the participants.
So you will receive an email to the email address that you registered for this webinar, explaining how you can retrieve your gift. And again, don't forget to check that spam folder if you don't receive it soon. So I want to close out and say again, thank you, Paul and Raj, our sponsor Snyk and AWS. And to the audience, thank you for taking an hour out of your time and spending it with us. Goodbye until next time.
Yep. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye now.